Okay, welcome everybody. So glad to see everybody today. We're very honored to have Scott Shay today as our featured author discussing his book, Conspiracy U. And I wanted to mention, by the way, that one of the people that Scott discusses in his book is a Northwestern professor called Stephen Thrasher, who obtained his position after graduating from NYU in 2019. And ZOA actually warned Northwestern against Stephen Thrasher in a press release dated May 29th, 2019. And my colleague Stuart is going to put that into the chat for you to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read a couple of select passages for that, from that press release. Thrasher hijacked his NYU graduation ceremony, this was in May of 2019, and speech to defame Israel and to praise and promote Jew-hating terror-linked boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, and virulent BDS groups, including Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, which intimidate, harass, assault, and torment American Jewish college students. Thrasher also called on everyone else to do the same as he did. Failing to rescind Thrasher's about to begin professorship at Northwestern will harm Northwestern's reputation, make Northwestern an unwelcome campus for Jewish students and donors, and damage the entire journalism profession. He's a journalism professor. Journalism professors are supposed to teach students to become objective reporters, not Jew-hating, Israel-defaming propagandists for terror-linked groups. Notably, Thrasher insisted during his NYU speech that it is everyone's duty and is what we are called on to do on every campus where we serve and every place where we work to attack Israel and support anti-Jewish BDS and BDS groups. Thrasher thus clearly revealed that he will likely also abuse his about to begin Northwestern professorship to defame Israel and promote virulent Jew-hating groups. It is also notable that Thrasher engaged in deceit in order to use his NYU graduation speech to defame Israel and promote anti-Jewish BDS groups. NYU President Andrew Hamilton revealed that Thrasher excluded his offensive anti-Israel pro-BDS rant from the version of the speech that he had submitted before the ceremony. And Scott Shay's book really shows what happened at Northwestern, is a case study, as the book explains, as to what happened at Northwestern when that warning by ZOA was not heeded by Northwestern. Scott, we really appreciate you being here today, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Liz. And in a way, that really got me writing this book. So I'm gonna change what I would normally with my intro. I was writing a 2,500 word essay on lessons I learned from my father in honor of his 75th anniversary of his liberation from Auschwitz. Not Auschwitz, Dachau. He was also in Auschwitz. 75th anniversary of his liberation from Dachau. And it was during that same time that I started it, that I read about then Dr. Thrasher's commencement speech. And I approached Northwestern. I'd been involved with Northwestern in a number of different ways. I talk about that a little bit in the book. And I was actually on the Medill investigative, well, at the time it was called the Medill Justice Project board. I was involved with a number of things that they were doing. And here Professor Thrasher, soon to be Professor Thrasher, was going to be named the chair of social justice reporting at Northwestern University. So not only was he being given a professorship, but a named professorship and a real podium. And the thing that was going on when I was writing this 2,500 word essay is I was reading another professor at Northwestern University, Arthur Butts, tenured professor in electrical engineering. And he, when I was an undergrad, had written a book called The Hoax of the 20th Century, in which he explains how the Holocaust didn't happen. And what struck me is, in reading it, is that he claims not to have anything against Jews, As a matter of fact, he likes certain Jews, those other Jews who deny the Holocaust. He really claims to be an anti-Zionist at heart. And when I was reading Professor Thrasher's tweets, and he's only actually written one article on Israel specifically, but he captures the zeitgeist. He captures the common thought among academics today in his tweets about Israel. And I read them and I realized, again, Professor Thrasher does not claim to hate Jews, heaven forbid. He likes certain Jews, Jews who are also anti-Israel Jews. What he really claims to be is against that anti-Zionism. And the more I read them, strangely, even though these folks, one at the north end of campus and one at the south end of campus, would claim to have nothing to do with each other, I found more and more that the far left and far right share in an extraordinary manner some of the same themes and some of the same sources. And what also unites them is conspiracy theories about Jews. So Arthur Butz, professor of at Northwestern University, writing his book, The Hoax of the 20th Century, he's confronted with some facts. And by the way, there's a 400-page book that he wrote, teeming with footnotes that are not really meaningful footnotes, which also shows you how the patina of academia can mean nothing. But he's confronted with some facts and claims to deal with them. And I'm just going to highlight two. One is that there are tens of thousands of documents that were found in Europe that clearly demonstrate the execution, the carrying out of the murder of 6 million Jews. So, like a good conspiracy theorist, and I find that this was a commonality, he has to go around that. And then he's confronted with another set of facts that many Germans confess to being witnesses, confess to being guards involved in one way or another, having seen in one way or another the Holocaust being executed, the murder of 6 million Jews in parts. Some confessed to being perpetrators, and they confessed wholeheartedly and with enthusiasm and conviviality to being perpetrators in the murder of Jews. So what he does is what a good conspiracy theorist does. He takes the conspiracy around the facts. So you may not have known this, but an evil cabal of Zionists planted all these documents, including the notes to the Wannsee Conference in 1942, which clearly delineated a plan for a final solution, quote unquote, their words. And scattered these documents all over so that they would be accidentally found by investigators or accidentally come across. That's how smart this evil cabal of Zionists were. And what about the perpetrators? Jews, there's one or two Jews who were peripherally involved with the Nuremberg trials, none of the major actors. But the presence of these Jews was such that they bamboozled, to use his word, poor, innocent, loving Nazis who would never imagine harming a fly to confess to crimes against humanity. That's how good these Jews are. And that's gives you a taste of the conspiracy theories throughout his book. Now, why did the Jews do it? Why did the Zionists do this? Well, they wanted to bamboozle Germany out of lots of money. And they also wanted to displace the Palestinians. And, you know, and I show and for Mein Kampf, another book that I don't recommend anybody reading. I read a lot of books I don't recommend anybody reading, frankly, in the course of doing this research. And I, by the way, only buy used books in this venue. I won't Butz's book was available on Amazon until 2017. Anybody could buy it, and he'd make money. So the thing that I found was that he's writing things that are straight from Mein Kampf as well. You know, that Israel would be a place, as Hitler put it, for using its sovereignty to create schemes, to a whole bunch of stuff that's really conspiracy theory stuff. So then I started reading Professor Thrasher. Now, Professor Thrasher would claim to be far, far from a prejudiced sort of person. But it turns out that he believes that Israel is sending drones around Gaza to gas people. He uses Holocaust imagery repeatedly. He's deleted a fair number of those tweets, but repeatedly uses conspiracy theories. Now, in Arthur Butz's case, he believes that the Jews are using their fake white skin to oppress white people all across the world, and especially Germans, good Germans. And Butz is, of course, a German American. And Professor Thrasher takes the other side. Jews are hyper white, using their hyper whiteness to oppress people of color all across the world. That Ferguson is Gaza, even though the two places only have the only two facts that Ferguson and Gaza have in common are that they both exist on the planet Earth. Other than that, they have nothing in common. He talks about conspiracies of Jews with police departments across the world to oppress minorities. And why are they doing this? Again, to displace the Palestinians, to bamboozle. He doesn't use that word. When you read them deeply, they end up saying the same thing. And others on the far right say this. I mean, I'm just going to quote because it's breathtaking to me. When I came across another professor who spoke at Northwestern, by the way, Stephen Saleta, who was a professor at University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. But Stephen Saleta was a hero at Northwestern. And by the way, Liz mentioned at the beginning that it would hurt Northwestern's reputation to have Professor Thrasher. But here's the really bad news. You can hire the most Jew-hating professor you want. And in academia these days, it doesn't really make much difference, which is really sad. But in any event, Stephen Saleta says, the Nazi Holocaust, it was one of the heroes, and Professor Thrasher cites him as a hero. The Nazi Holocaust in Europe seems a direct antecedent to Israel's founding. There were plans from the outset of Zionism to rid the promised land of its indigenous population. The problem with the remembrance of the Nazi Holocaust is that it happens in isolation from relevant historical events and worse, from their ongoing consequences. It's not very useful at all if a corresponding genocide is taking place, as with the Palestinians, at the hand of Israel. So there you have it. Essentially, the far left and the far right, actually the far left in this case, taking Arthur Butz a step further by saying that the Nazi Holocaust was not only a myth, but somehow was caused by the Jews mindfully to create a narrative. So look, what do? What's the difference between a conspiracy theory or conspiracy theories like those that I just were talking about, that I was just aforementioned, or actual conspiracies? Well, first of all, you can have a theory about a conspiracy. Let's say, for example, and I'm just going to take a one that's been in the press not that long ago. Let's take, for example, that there was a conspiracy to cover up in China that the Wuhan virology lab accidentally leaked the COVID-19 virus? Well, what you would do if you want to determine that, it's fair to have that theory, but you need to develop facts. You need to send a delegation. You need to determine whether the facts lead you in one direction or another. And you may come up with the conclusion that we don't have enough facts. We can't fully determine, or we're being prevented from discovering the facts. Therefore, we don't know. That's one thing. But another thing, and another whole universe away, is a conspiracy theory, which are attenuated facts that are unconnected dot points, such as there were one or two members of the Nuremberg trial commission who were side actors. Again, none of the major actors, but they somehow took over the whole thing. They took over the whole event, the whole enchilada, and convinced people to confess to these crimes that they didn't do, and falsified data and falsified evidence. That's pretty, you need real facts to start making accusations like that, but that doesn't bother anybody. And I do this in the book, there's another professor at Northwestern University who I cite. It's not just, by the way, Thrasher, sadly. There are others at Northwestern, and I cite some of them and what they wrote. There's a professor, named Jessica Winigar, who you can't even understand what she's talking about unless you think Israel and Zionists are really, really evil. She wrote a whole book in which she talks about how the anthropology profession is being oppressed by Zionists, as though Zionists have nothing better to do than to hang around anthropology departments and try to quash anthropologists from getting tenure or getting positions. Now, here's the thing. She does exhaustive research, partially funded by Northwestern University, with scores of graduate and non-graduate and undergraduate students at Northwestern. And what does she find? She's got 3 cases in the end. 2 anthropology professors were up for tenure, both virulently Jew haters, and they got tenure. And then a third person applied for an administrative position, had tenure already, and didn't get that administrative position. Based on that data and based on interviews which she has of people who she talks to who feel in anthropology departments that they're being watched, that there's Jewish moles in their classes. She uses the word campus rabbi in quotation marks. They're not really campus rabbis, they're somehow monitoring them. That there's compulsory Zionism in anthropology departments. On and on, stuff that actually makes no sense. She feels, and she talks to scores of anthropologists who feel like they're being oppressed by Zionists. But she admits she can find no evidence of that in the book. I quote her. So normally, if you think there's a demon out there and you've checked everywhere and you can't find any evidence of that demon, you don't normally say that makes my proof so much stronger, because the Jews, the Zionists, are so good at covering up that I couldn't find the actual evidence. That's not what an academic normally does. And someone who feels oppressed but can't find any evidence of that, usually, I don't know, they seek to do other things other than write a book about it. So this is, and I'll just give you one more professor at Northwestern, Sammy Hermes. Sammy Hermes, early in his career, compared Hassan Nasrallah to someone who should win the Nobel Peace Prize, for example, like Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. Here's a person who thinks every last Jew on the planet should be murdered, and has been public and is proud to say so. Everyone on this call should be murdered. Yet you have that person lauded by a professor at Northwestern who's also been promoted and has tenure. So none of this has hurt anybody. None of this has actually, unfortunately, really negatively impacted Northwestern University. And I go through other schools. Jasper Puar, who some of you may know at Rutgers, is being, if any of you live in New Jersey, your taxpayer dollars are supporting her tenure in which she thinks the Jews are harvesting organs from Palestinians and others and giving them to Israelis. That they're being systemically starved using computer algorithms, et cetera. Well, your taxpayer dollars are at work. So time and time again, I found on campus, you could say almost anything. And if you can create a conspiracy theory run, I don't know how many of you on this call ever watch or on this Zoom ever have seen Alien Invaders. Anybody want to raise their hand at least if you've seen Alien Invaders on the Discovery Channel or History Channel, should I say? Well, their proof standards are better than what's going on campus. And that's really unbelievable. So I think that what we need to do is make this, and the reason I wrote this book, I mean, I have a busy day job, as some of you may know, but I took 20 months of all of my discretionary free time writing this book. And I did it so that it can be given to legislators, like it, and I know some people have done it, University of Illinois, again, supporting anti-Zionism. And a lot of times alumni, and I've heard this from alumni, I've heard this from trustees who I've talked to, they go in and they complain to the development department or they complain to the provost if they're a trustee. And mostly what they're doing is waving their hands because they don't have the facts. They don't have chapter and verse. And that's why I wrote the book, to not only for people to understand the issue and to read it. I think I just knocked this as I tapped. Not only to learn, but also to actually have the goods. Here's what people are saying, and this isn't criticism of Israel. It's not criticism of Israel to want the state abolished and the Jews exterminated or expelled. That's not criticism. That's a different thing. And so far, we've taught, what I tried to do here is that immediately the response is freedom of speech. Well, it's not freedom of speech either. And academics are supposed to have standards and academic standards. And I compare in the book the academic standards that are supposed to be enforced and what they really are. And I think that we're going to have to, because frankly, people aren't interested in this as a Jewish issue. The other thing I've learned is how quickly it's dismissed. 377,000 people since 2014 have been killed in Yemen. People aren't that interested. There was 120 Palestinians, last year who, over the last few years who were killed in the West Bank and Gaza, mostly in the last 2 years from defensive reprisals. That's really what needs to be focused on. Those 377,000 people, not so much. 600,000 to 700,000 killed and murdered in Syria. 2.5 million refugees. Not really interesting because no Jews really did that. So people don't get into this at all, which is, we talk there's a lot of talk of allyship. There's really very little allyship. So I think we need to start working on this in a different kind of way. We're coming to the holiday of Purim. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the book of Esther and the story. So Mordecai says to Esther, after hearing of the decree, go talk to King Ahasuerus and tell him what's happening and get him to stop. And what's her response? He'll kill me, likely. That plan's a stupid plan. Don't even talk to me about a plan like that. Saying what you're going direct at this doesn't even work. Esther comes up with something much more subtle. She goes to the king not to say save the Jews. That wouldn't have worked. But to get Ahasuerus worried by inviting him to that first feast and getting him to stay up at night and thinking of what the consequences are for him. And it's only when he's in the deep of night, when there's nobody around to spin, and when he can actually study the historical record and think himself, that the penny starts to drop, and the Jews are, and Haman is deposed. But don't forget, it's only because it's good for Ahasuerus. And what happens next? Haman is deposed, he's hung. But the Jews still aren't saved. Esther has to go back and try to save the Jews once the environment is better. So similarly, with all due respect to the ZOA book, ZOA release on Thrasher, you could do a release a day and it will have no impact. We need to be smarter about this. We're going to need to get the universities to recognize that to the extent that they denude themselves of academic standards, that's the end for them. And we need to do that not around students. Students, I was almost going to wait for it today, but literally 100% of the times that I've spoken to Jewish groups about my book, I get a question about how do we prepare our children, or how do my student, my daughter, my son, my niece, my nephew for what's going on campus. The answer is that's impossible. The faculty are the permanent presence on campus. Students have to fear grade reprisals, social reprisals, etc. We should be defending the students, not vice versa. So we need to get a lot smarter about this. And that's why I wrote the book. I mean, I suggest some points at the end about academic standards and about getting the universities back to evidence. And I think we're going to have to be smarter. I think we're going to have to be like Esther. Because if you just go in and charge into the King Ahasuerus' court, to the trustees, they're going to start saying, you know, the law of the land, the law can't be changed. And that frankly, they really don't care. So I'm going to just say on that note, I want to leave it with that we have work to do. And again, that's the reason I wrote this book. It's the reason I've just thrown myself into this. And I think it's important for all of us to do it, but the biggest part is not talking to ourselves. It's going to be talking to others and finding allies. So Liz, I'm going to turn the podium back to you. And I'm available for questions.
Right, great. Let me just put some pins. That's wonderful. Thank you for that excellent presentation. That was just terrific. And I do want to, mention that one of the things that's very interesting in the book is you discuss some of the academic literature on what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a regular falsehood. And basically, this interesting point that you raised, that the lack of evidence in a conspiracy theory, lack of evidence of the truth is for the true proof of the conspiracy, which is really illogical and sort of insane. And I also thought it was very interesting how you spoke about Hitler's anti-Zionism, which is not that well known, and that comes across in the book also. I do want to mention, however, with due respect, that ZOA does not just put out press releases every day. We are extremely active on campus.
Oh, I know. I was being facetious there.
We defend students on campuses throughout the country, including Northwestern. We bring Title VI. We're very smart about how we do that. We use every single avenue. And I think it's extremely important that you mentioned the academic standards attack, which was actually also in our press release. And we certainly bring that up very much, and also the Jewish students' rights to a harassment-free campus under Title VI, which ZOA was instrumental in obtaining. But anyway, I will open this up to questions, and I do want to mention that Scott needs to leave us at 2 o'clock, so we can't go on and on with the questions. So please, if you have questions, make them relatively brief. And if you have a question, please either put it in the chat or raise your hand in the raise your hand function, and we will call on you if you'd like to ask your question live. And I guess I'll start with a question that I received via email this morning, which was somebody was wondering if you could speak about how this may have infested women's studies and some of these other ethnic studies programs.
Yeah, there's no question the women's studies, ethnic studies, and sadly, Jewish studies departments have been infected. I mean, I was dumbfounded at some of the things that I found in Jewish studies departments, which Jews sort of thought that by donating to Jewish studies department, they would have sympathetic voices on campus. And instead, some of the most virulent anti-Zionist faces have been from Jewish studies departments, and people who at Vassar, for example, they co-sponsored Jasper Puar coming to campus, who is, again, as I mentioned earlier, a virulent Jewish hater. But I have to say, it's part of the decline of academic standards writ large. In the book, I mentioned someone who I got to know a bit, Barry Watkins, who founded the Women's Studies Department, was one of the founders of the Women's Studies Department at Northwestern University. And I would tell you, she was smart enough and had enough standards at the time. She sadly passed away, but she had enough standards at the time that if you brought a pro-feminist argument, for example, but didn't have facts, she would heaven help you. She'd chop you down. And there were Marxists on campus who could articulate what capitalism is. But now you've lost that. It's a one-sided ideology. And what's happened is that universities, I'm going to be brief here because I know there are a lot of questions, but I do want to say this. Here's the problem. It's more than the sort of quote-unquote studies departments. It's that universities have gone from believing that their mission was furthering truth and intellectual and the intellectual capital of society to becoming social justice movements, and that their purpose is social justice, not the pursuit of intellectual advancement. That was the turning point that's changed everything.
Okay, we have several questions about having Jewish donors and other pro-Israel donors stop donating. We have one from Jeffrey Bloom, who's a Northwestern alum, who said he stopped donating and convinced a few friends to do the same. But the mega donors are really the biggest issue here. And what are your thoughts about that? About having an effort to have prominent Jewish philanthropists not support the universities that are engaged in this sort of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and lack of academic standards?
Well, in the book, I talk one thing. I do retell the story about when Northwestern's student government considered a BDS resolution and asked the trustees to divest from companies involved with Israel, 5 companies in particular. And I spoke to several, and I don't name names per se, but I spoke to several trustees who in some cases reached out to me because they knew I was leading the charge on the other side. And I spoke to some non-Jewish trustees. And since then, since the book, I've spoken to and I've been reached out from trustees from other universities. And here's the thing that I discovered. In the United States, we don't have knighthoods.
You have what?
We don't have knighthoods. You can't become sir or dame.
Mhm.
So being on the board of Northwestern University or Harvard or Princeton, or any school is a lot of prestige. And people really aspire to, and Jews aspire to. I spoke to the chairman of one major university who everybody will recognize who's Jewish, who understands these issues. But you know what? Sadly, it's a little bit like what I was talking about before. There's a lack of courage. Also in the story of the book of Esther, Esther says, or Mordecai says to Esther that when she says no, he says, don't think you're going to save your own skin. You might have been in this position for just this very time. And those trustees are the alternative universe, unfortunately, of what happens when these trustees are in a position to do something and they don't. And they're not that interested. And I've talked to them, and in some cases, and I've talked to them, pretty strongly, having done research on what's going on their particular campus. But I think that the issue is a place like Vassar, virulently anti-Israel. So a normal university gets 30-40% of its alumni to donate. It doesn't really impact them that much if instead of 40%, it's 39%. We need to outreach to others. We need to outreach to and explain why we're not donating. And we need to convince others not to donate. It needs to become noticeable. And the truth of the matter is, it's not yet noticeable. There is a group called Concerned Alumni for Campus Fairness, which is alumni who basically are going to their alma maters and saying what their issues are. And there have been cases when organized groups have done that. But if you're just one pro-Israel person and you stop donating, it doesn't really make a difference. So there needs to be a lot more organization. There needs to be targeting of the trustees, of the Jewish trustees, in a mindful way to contact them and to outreach to them. And look, Neil Blum, spelled differently than at least on the Zoom. Neil Blum just donated $200 million to Northwestern. Jay Pritzker, governor of Illinois. Again, you have many, many Jews who are donating. And the trick is to use our networks to reach those people, because if they say something, it'll matter.
Thank you. By the way, we do try, I think the fact that it may not have worked in some cases should not stop us from contacting the trustees. ZOA has done that many times, and it's, sometimes it's been quite successful, reaching out to both Jewish and non-Jewish trustees.
And if I could put in a shameless plug, some of the reason that I've gotten outreach from trustees is because people have sent them my book. I mean, seriously.
Right. No.
And I get a cold email or a cold call because for better, for worse, I'm pretty easily reachable.
I'd like to encourage everybody who is, concerned about this to buy the book and to share it with people, because this is an important tool in their efforts to change things in college campuses and stop all this anti-Semitism and the lack of standards. Let's see. We also have a question from Gina Friedlander. She asks, what universities do you address other than Northwestern University in your book?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I talk about Champaign-Urbana, talk about Rutgers in the book. Who knew that there was a far right anti-Semite from Cal State. I talk a bit about the UCLA, So a lot of universities do make it, but the reason I used Northwestern as a case study was just to drill down deep on the theories of these main two professors, but I expand it to four, and then I talk about, other professors at other universities, essentially who he cites. But it's all part of one far left ideology that really is endemic. I go through I'm seeing somebody saying something about Rutgers. To permit what some professors at Rutgers say, particularly Jasper Puar, but others, about any group of people on the planet Earth, she would lose her job. She even admitted at a speech at Vassar that she was making this stuff up. Her book, if you do a Google search, it doesn't make it past the third page. Total loss of academic and moral standards. And yet, again, here's where I think we go to the legislators, and we go to trustees. By the way, Jonathan Halloway who was provost at Northwestern. I do follow the sort of not that Northwestern is the seat of all of this, don't get me wrong, but I use it as a leitmotif. Jonathan Halloway, president of Rutgers, was provost at Northwestern. And again, goes, with the academic free speech, but no way Jasper Puar, Professor Puar, could get away with saying any of that stuff about anybody and have tenure or even get their book published. But to go to the question before, that book, The Right to Maim, won the award for best book from the Women's Studies Association of America.
Yeah. Maxine Morris is asking, can you elaborate on the free speech defense? How can we counter that in our own conversations? I assume, you just go to the academic stand. Yeah, one of the prime ways to do that is go to the effect that there needs to be academic standards. Could you,
Sure.
I'll let you answer.
Sure. I believe in free speech. I mean, I think more speech helps bad speech, but the truth of the matter is, and I showed this, I gave examples at Northwestern and at other places, there is not free speech for Zionists. There is not. You could not be. Steve Thrasher could not have gotten a PhD at NYU in the American Studies department were he to have been pro-Israel. In the anthropology department at Northwestern, where I taught, you can't be pro-Israel. You can't actually have free speech. And academics are not about free speech. They're actually very clear academic standards as to what is permitted to be said in and permitted to be written in an academic piece. You can go out in this, if you're a professor and you want to go out on the corner and shout any sort of craziness, you get that free speech right, and I will defend that too. But if you're a professor and you write a book that says that the Jews caused the Holocaust, like Stephen Saleta, and it's published by Duke University Press, or you are Jessica Winigar and you claim that essentially Zionism is the worst evil in the world, and it is, or aligned with the worst evils in the world, and that they're oppressing anthropologists, and that there's compulsory Zionism in anthropology. When a resolution to not to just censure Israel but not to boycott it was voted 184 in favor, I believe, and like 2,000 against. You know, there's virtually no one who's even willing to raise their hand to that. And it's published by Stanford University Press, having supposedly gone through peer review in all of these cases. Then, yeah, you've got an academic standards problem. That's not a free speech problem. If you want to go and publish that stuff for on a self-publish it and try to sell it, fine. Stanford University Press, Duke University Press, peer review? No, that's not academic standards. And that's where we need to go, because we have hope there. Just saying, by the way, people have complained, and I've been on with a group, I can't get into details, from Duke, who've complained about the Duke University Press. They just don't care. We need to get allies, and we need to align ourselves with others. Stanford University Press just doesn't really care.
By the way, let me mention that ZOA has been very active at Duke University and Rutgers. You know, many of these campuses, and to get a settlement agreement from Duke, which we've been trying to enforce as the steps that they'll take. It's you know, but it's a constant battle. We have somebody, Diane Henry, asking about University of California, Irvine's Humanities Center. I mean, Irvine is Irvine is actually the campus that prompted the ZOA to start the 6-year battle to cover Jewish students under the civil rights laws. And UC Davis and UC San Diego, if you have anything you could share about those campuses.
Well, I mean, there's this unfortunate, they were very active. All those campuses were very active in the libel, in the slander against Jews of the so-called deadly exchange. I don't know if everybody's heard of that. This notion, the JVP, actually, Jewish Voice for Peace, right, has to take credit for originating, which is the Jews were the cause of the militarization of the US police, and are sharing tactics and testing them out on Palestinians, and then they're used in the United States against minorities. That's the deadly exchange, JVP, blood libel. After the killing of George Floyd, the University of California tried to get on many campuses, I can't say if all of those mentioned, I'd have to go back to my notes, but to have all essentially Jewish groups not be able to participate in any other group, because of course the suspicion is they might be Zionists. And they've tried to get censuring by doing that. And University of California has been particularly, the various campuses, they range, you know, from campus to campus. But I want to say one thing about allies, because now that you're talking about University of Illinois, I don't know how many people have heard of Eric Hoffer. Eric Hoffer, you should Google him if you haven't. He was one of the great sociologists of the 50s and 60s, no academic background. And he taught at the University of California at Berkeley. And one of the main reasons why Berkeley, until frankly after he was gone, was not actually a hotbed of anti-Zionism. It actually was, there were plenty of anti-Zionists at Berkeley, but it wasn't really a hotbed until after he was no longer there, was because he was such a respected voice. And he actually got up at a rally and said that if this was, I think, I can't remember whether it was the 67 war or the 73, 72, I don't remember offhand. Again, but he said after one of those, during one of those two wars as they were going on, he said if Israel were to lose, he would stop teaching and he would write nothing more, because Israel was so important to him. And this wasn't a Jewish person. really had no connection to Israel per se that anybody knew. I don't know, maybe they know now. But he was willing to stand out. He was willing to be a real ally. And, you know, subsequently, obviously, Berkeley's become much more left wing, and he's no longer there, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's the importance of finding good allies, because they were left far before everybody else was far left.
There's a question in the chat about how do you spell Hoffer? I believe it's Hoffer. I actually studied him in college, but is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Unbelievable. I mean, I recommend his books. It has nothing to do with this, but he's great.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, he's just great.
Okay, and there's a question from Sandra Cohn about the blood libel that Jews started the Black Plague and COVID. And I don't know if you've mentioned any of that in the book, or if you wanted to speak to that.
Look, I mean, these are conspiracy theories. I talk about a lot of conspiracy theories. COVID, when I was writing the book, was obviously that was at the end of it started at the end of the writing of the book, but essentially anything evil. It's so on the far left, they aren't saying that Israel and the Jews started COVID, but what they are saying is that they withheld treatments from Palestinians and all of that sort of thing. So
wasn't true. I mean, I remember.
Wasn't true.
Yeah, Israel was it? You know, they had many, hundreds of thousands of doses that they wanted to give it to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority rejected it, and then said that Israel wouldn't give it to them.
And Israel gave it to other countries, and of course, they did take enough so that the senior ministers and the like were inoculated, were vaccinated. But look, what I do in the book is show, and I devote a chapter to this because I think it's very important, is to explain how conspiracy theories are created, because and why the other folks who have done the academics who have done deep dives into conspiracy theories are surprised that most conspiracy theories tend to come back to Jews some way or another. I mean, if you set aside, you've read the book, Liz, but if you set aside, Paul is dead, Paul McCartney is dead, or Elvis is alive, and some sort of harmless theories like that, they all tend to come back to Jews. Mm-hmm. And some of these conspiracy theories are made up purposely with political motivations. Typically, I also show. Look, we know now we're talking about Ukraine and the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union, now that the Soviet archives are open, we know that some of the propaganda documents have not some, but well, we don't know that we've got all, but a good chunk of them have been made publicly available and indeed were searchable before the last X years of Putin. But here are some things that the Soviets in the 50s and 60s wrote and put in the Great Soviet Encyclopedia that at the time they knew they were making up. Literally, they knew they were making up. The main posits of modern Zionism are militant chauvinism, racism, anti-communism, anti-Sovietism. The anti-human reactionary essence of Zionism is an overt and covert fight against the freedom movements and against the USSR. It goes on and on, serving as front squad of colonialism and neo-colonialism. International Zionism is fighting against the national liberation movements of the people of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. On and on. Whatever current event is happening that's bad, the Soviets made up a conspiracy theory about Jews on it. And that's starting, sadly, to happen in China. It's not so bad in China yet, but it's starting to happen there too, where Jews are, I don't even know why they're bothering, but they are. But it's not so unusual to take an event and blame it on the Jews. If your watch is stolen, people say, stop Jew, not stop thief.
I know you have to get off, hard stop at 2 o'clock. So let me just read a couple of the other questions you had. We've been overwhelmed with questions in the chat. And also people are asking for your contact or how to contact you if you want to announce that.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm reachable. I have a website, scottshay.com. And that's why I say I'm pretty easily to reach, but I try to answer questions if I can, but I get book length, I get chapter length emails, and those I really can't answer because I get too many. So, so some, but you can also see the things I'm writing about. And I really do, again, ask people to not only to read the book, but I ask them to use the book, because that's actually, if it's used surgically with legislators, with legislative aides, with trustees, that's actually, I'm not looking for this to be a bestseller. I'm looking for it to be most effective. Oh, thank you. I see someone showing the book, but I'm looking for it to be effective and to learn from it.
Glad to see that you have it. I also want to mention, let me just quickly read a few of these. And I also want to announce the upcoming mega event on March 6th about Judea and Samaria. It's in the chat. I think my colleague will put it into the chat again. That's, there've been two, this is the third installment. The first two you'll be able to see on ZOA's YouTube channel. Very important event. Fantastic information has been shared at these events. And the last one will be March 6th, Sunday, March 6th at 11 a.m. Just look in the chat. We have the information to sign on there for that. I really wanted to ask you if you could speak about your father. There's so many more things we'd love to speak with you about your father's experience in the Holocaust and how that affected you in writing the book. People asked about the IRA definition, how that could fit in and be used. People wanted you to address the role of the DEI, the diversity and inclusion departments, equity and inclusion departments. Ira Berkowitz sort of, sadly, comment, sadly amusing comment, what haven't we been accused of? Very true. I mean, this is sort of like, the old joke of the guy who reads the anti-Semitic newspapers instead of the Jewish newspapers, and someone asks him, why are you reading those? He says, when I read the Jewish newspapers, I get depressed, because everybody is attacking us. So, I read about how everybody's attacking us all the time. And when I'm reading the anti-Semitic newspapers, I feel great because, we control the world. And, this is, it's a sad commentary. But anyway, if you want to, have some closing remarks, and then I'll tell people a little bit more about our upcoming event.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank everyone for having me. You're doing important.
Thank you. Thank you so
important
much.
work, and unfortunately, not enough people are doing the work. So I want to applaud you. I want to applaud you, not just individually, but you as a group, because Jews are the canary in the coal mine. What's bad for the Jews tends to be bad for societies. The anti-Semitism going on campus, it is bad for the Jews. It ultimately will be destructive to the United States and to Western civilization. Having said that, being the canary is not so good either. We don't want to be the first to keel over. And it's on us. I mean, it's pouring time soon. And I really do admonish everyone. We all have assets. We all have resources. I mean, the reason I wrote this book is because I thought I had to, because I don't want to live with myself thinking, well, I could have done this. I could have made a little bit of a difference, and I didn't. Because I think, look, my view is that life is a test. Are we going to let the test go by or not? And I've talked to trustees who have at least they've contacted me, and then they don't do anything. And I think really, really deeply that this is a time when we can make a difference or choose not to make a difference. And all of you are already, signed up to some degree because you're on this call, you're involved in ZOA. we've all got our own resources. We've all got our own contacts. We've all got our own ideas. You know, I hope every one of you leaves this call thinking about how to make a difference. And I am going to have to sign off because I have I am a little bit on a book tour sort of thing. So a Zoom book tour. So I am going to have to sign off.
Well, thank you, Scott, for making a difference and joining us. And I hope everyone will buy the book.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And you're making I know all of you are making a difference. And please also contribute to ZOA, so that we can continue to make a difference and get involved. And and please, the mega event is really a fabulous event. If you've heard the first two segments of it, they discussed, some of them, showed us the maps and, just remarkable information about how illegal Arab building is a planned illegal Arab building with European and US funding, hundreds of millions of dollars of that has been encroaching on and taking over the areas under Israeli jurisdiction. That's Area C. Eye-opening. There's something like 72,000 illegal Arab structures now in this area, which is supposed to be the Jewish area, and strategically placed to try to interfere with Jewish communities. It's really been a very eye-opening event. The third segment is Sunday, March 6th at 11 a.m. I hope all of you will join us then, and you see the link in the chat. And anyway, thank you all for making a difference and for being here today. Thank you again. And have a wonderful week.